So I've been thinking a lot about architecture and where it's headed in the year 2026. And I'm thinking that a lot of people are starting to wonder if this is even a good career to pursue anymore, especially with everything that's going on with technology, things like AI advancement, and what that means for the career. So maybe some of you guys are thinking of jumping ship because things are just not looking good. Or maybe some of you guys who are just starting out or thinking of starting architecture are thinking like, maybe now's not a good time, or maybe architecture is done. And so I've been giving this a lot of thought lately, and I wanted to share my thoughts and my opinions on this with you guys. So, first and foremost, let's talk about the big old elephant here in the room, which is AI, right? AI is getting better. There's no doubt about that. Things like ChatGPT go, it's like a roller coaster at the moment. Some days it's good, some days it is bad. But there's a lot of advancement that's happening within the career, that is driven by AI at the moment. You have a lot of things like rendering services that are getting better. You have a lot of information. However you put it, AI is just faster and better at retrieving information than the average architectural student. So if you think about that, right, you're going straight out of school right into the career. AI is going to be better than you at detailing a building. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be better at drafting it, because at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any promising technology that allows AI to draft, but that's coming, right? So, what happens when AI not only can find the information, because it can already do that, and yes, sometimes it does hallucinate and sometimes it does make mistakes, right? But who doesn't, right? There's no such thing as perfection here, and that's only going to get better. So, what happens when AI can not only find the information, it can find it quickly, but then it can also create accurate drafts of this? It can actually create actual details. That's when the career starts to get in trouble from a human's perspective. So, what I'm trying to say here is that eventually I do see a world where AI will hurt the jobs out there. But I don't think it's as grim as everybody's making it seem right now, because I personally think that we're quite a ways away from that. It's hard to find people in this field that do a good job. It's hard to find people that care, that have passion in architecture. And I think that's what makes you have some sort of permanence within this career. What I mean by that is that at the moment, right, if you have your own business in architecture and you want to hire someone to work with you, it's really hard to find someone that does a good job. And so when you do find someone that does a good job, that's good at what they do, then it's kind of hard to think about replacing them. So, what I mean by that is that when you take a look at AI, right, AI is already replacing some jobs, and it's certainly replacing some of the 3D artist jobs out there, unfortunately. So, when it comes to architecture, anything that's some sort of service where you are kind of sketching, or where you're kind of conveying some sort of schematic ideas to someone, that's like at the bottom of the food chain, unfortunately. Now, if you're a CG artist who specializes in finished works, right, finished renderings, then you're kind of safe for now, but you're probably going to be one of the first ones to get attacked when AI becomes much better than it is now. So then the question becomes, how do you protect yourself, if you are in this field or you're thinking of going into this field? How do you protect yourself so that you're not replaced by AI? I think that you shouldn't even be thinking about AI because you could be replaced by just another person, someone who's much more passionate than you are, someone who's much more involved in learning. So, if you are in this career at the moment, or you're thinking of getting in this career, my advice to you is to think of specializing yourself. Now, think of architecture like a big umbrella, and within this umbrella there's a bunch of little niches, right? And within each of those niches there's sub niches, subcategories of architecture. As an example, right, you could think of residential. Residential is a small niche, actually it's a pretty large niche within this world of architecture, but you can subspecialize. For example, you can specialize in cottages, right? And then you can subspecialize even further. You can specialize in cottages that are made out of wood in a specific climate. Just an idea, just a thought. What I'm trying to say here is that the more specific that you get with your specialization, the more you stand out amongst the field of other architects. And I think that that's something that many people don't realize. Many people are focused on making just general architecture work, but don't realize that general architecture is kind of a cookie cutter, which means that there's a lot of competition. And so there's just an opportunity to step aside from that and follow whatever interests you. So I think that if you're in this career and you have some time under your belt, you should think about specializing. And if you don't want to specialize in actual, like, let's say, construction documents for residential, for these cottages in the middle of this specific climate zone, then that's fine. You can specialize yourself in a product. For example, you could become a thermal assembly guy, someone that focuses on the building science, and maybe you focus on the building science of a very particular um, area of architecture. What I'm trying to say here, guys, is that instead of focusing on what can take your job, you should focus on becoming really good at one subcategory within architecture so that it becomes harder for other people to take your job, right? So going back to like AI and competition and losing your job, and is architecture even a good career path in 2026? Look, I'll be honest with you. I think that architecture is such a general industry, like such a giant industry. There's so many avenues that you have to think of it like an ecosystem. You have to think of it like a food chain. So, as I mentioned before, think about AI. What is AI really good at right now? It's really good at finding information, right? Even if it's not right all the time, it's really good at finding information. And it's really good at generating images, and surprisingly, it's really good at generating music, right? This is something that I recently started to kind of play around with myself. And I'm like, Jesus, this is actually pretty good at this. Um, haven't messed around too much with video, but it seems like AI is making huge strides in the entertainment industry, right? And so you got to think of whatever is the entertainment part of architecture that's going to get hit hard unless you specialize. I'm not saying that you guys got to stop rendering or you guys got to stop learning these things, but you just have to give that some thought. The fact that AI seems to be moving in the direction of entertainment, that's naturally what's going to get hit the hardest in architecture. Now, something that's really cool about architecture is that the aesthetics, the entertainment part of it, is actually the smallest part of architecture. Think about it. Anybody can draw a pretty picture, like anybody can make a building look good, and like anybody. You don't need to go to school for that. It helps to understand the concepts and the fundamentals of design, but really anybody can make a cool picture. I've seen people that are not architects that are just artists, and they don't understand all the fundamentals, the basics of architecture, and they're still able to generate some really cool concepts of buildings. Especially if you look at like video games, like I've played video games where you walk around cities and they weren't necessarily architects that designed that, but they just had an interest in like the built environment, and they were able to create these really cool spaces. So that goes to show you that almost anybody can do that, right? If they just have like passion for design and for space. Like look at kids with Minecraft building these really cool homes, right? Like anybody can do this. So AI can certainly do this. What AI and I guess non-architects struggle with is how to make a building work, right? Because at the end of the day, if you think of AI, right, they can find the information, but first of all, no building official is going to listen to AI. Number one, just because of legal reasons. Like I don't see at the moment, right? This is probably possible in the future, but in the near future, I don't see a world where you will draft up something by an AI and an AI will sign and seal it, and then the jurisdiction will approve of that, accept it. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to sue an AI. Someone has to take responsibility for that. So if the person that's signing that document used AI, they are ultimately responsible for that document. So they better look at what's being produced by the AI, because if not, they're assuming a lot of risk. And so if you think about that for a second, there's a problem with AI, which is trust. You see, the built environment, it doesn't really like change. If you look at the way that architecture is being done or has been done for the last hundreds of years, there has been significant improvements in materiality, but it's not like every 100 years we go from a total different typology. Like typologies have slowly evolved, and I feel like as codes get stricter, that typology evolves even slower. Like, yeah, there's definitely like improvements in the technology, right? Like glass is getting better at thermal properties, and it's getting more clear, and it's getting stronger. Things are getting better, but code is really slow compared to the innovations that are happening. Code doesn't really like to change quickly, because if code changes too quickly, then you're at risk of people getting hurt. And so technology tends to move exponentially, but the built environment does not. And so this creates a little bit of a safety net for architects and for builders, because there's not that fear that things are going to change overnight. There's going to be new things that are going to be tested, new innovations, but it's going to take quite a bit of time for them to be adopted by local jurisdictions. So what this means by architecture, for architecture, if you're thinking of studying this career, or if you're in it at the moment and you're kind of fearing like, damn, this is not a good career anymore, I really think that we are in the clear, at least in the local uh, time frame, just because of that simple fact that building and construction doesn't want to change. And so I don't see a world in the near future where AI is going to become an architect. And what I mean by that is like an architect of record, someone who is researching the code and taking responsibility for creating a set of documents that meets or exceeds codes, and also maintains the public safety. Because at the end of the day, AI can't take responsibility for anything. That like it's not totally clear to me legally what would happen, and because of that, I don't see a world where jurisdictions would approve of this. So right off the bat, if you're an architect who's signing and sealing, an architect of record, I think your job is pretty safe if you're looking at the traditional sense of what an architect is, which is creating a design, making a design work, and making sure that design is safe for people to inhabit it and also meets code. So the other things that, going back to the food chain that we were talking about, so at the bottom is anything that's entertainment, and then somewhere at the top of that food chain is anything that is code related. So when you're looking at the built environment, so anything that's closest to the built environment in architecture, you can pretty much assume that it's going to be safe. Now, going back to the original question of, is architecture a good career for 2026? Like, is it still safe to practice this career? My answer is yes. I think that unfortunately, one of the things that sucks about architecture is that it seems to be, um, like directly proportional to the uh, real estate market. So if the real estate market is hot, developers are more frisky with their money. They're building more. So they're hiring more architects to build stuff. And so there's plenty of work to go around. The problem is when the real estate market slows down, or when you have global economical problems like we're having now with certain issues with tariffs and whatnot, that just makes investors scared or worried, then architecture tends to slow down. So in general, architecture is kind of not a super safe career to get into if it seems like the economy is unsure. Like if things are scaling quickly as they were a couple years ago, then architecture is great. There's plenty of work, there's plenty of investors, plenty of developers. But if people are kind of concerned, then you have these developers that are unsure if they want to buy that plot of land because they're scared that they're going to start building and then they're not going to get in, money from their investors because their investors are going to pull out, and then now they have half a building that's sitting there, and then there's an issue. So that's the biggest risk with architecture as a career. But I'll be honest with you guys, I think it comes down to how interested you are in the career. Like one of the worst reasons to get into architecture is because you like to design, right? Like you like to build stuff, you like to draw stuff. Like you could become a carpenter and there's much less risk, and you could still build all you want. You could probably build way more than you do as an architect. I think that someone who wants to get into architecture should be passionate about buildings inside and out. Like you should be passionate about, and remember what I said, there's specialization. So I think as a whole, you should be interested in buildings the same way that a car enthusiast might be really interested in cars, right? Like a car enthusiast doesn't necessarily only want to go fast. Like that's maybe why they got into cars, but then they started to specialize in maybe antique models because they like the aesthetics, or maybe they started to dive deep into the inner workings of the car. But regardless, if you're a car enthusiast, you have a high probability that you know a thing or two about how cars work over the average person. And so that's my thinking about architecture. I feel like for some reason, it's very intuitive to think about a car person being into cars and being knowledgeable about cars. But for some reason, when people think about architecture, they think like, I just like to draw, or I'm good at drawing, or I'm good at math, and so I should be an architect. But it's not the same. I really think that you should think of it like the car analogy that I just mentioned, right? If you really are interested about buildings and how they're put together and what's below the ground under a building and what's inside the walls and how are buildings progressing and how can buildings get better and how have they gotten worse, this is the kind of thinking that points you in the direction of, do you like architecture truly, or do you not? Now, that's not the reason why you should get into architecture. I think that this is a little bit sophisticated compared to like what I thought when I got into architecture. I was from the school of thought of, I like to draw and houses are cool and I want to have a really big house one day. So I'm going to do architecture. But looking back, that's not the best reasoning for it. I think that the best reasoning for it is I really like buildings and I really want to know more about buildings, and I want to know how to make buildings better. Um, and to understand how to make buildings better, I gotta understand what makes buildings bad. How are buildings today? How were buildings before? How are buildings in different parts of the world? And then that way you can make buildings better. And so if you have that kind of thought, or that kind of thought sounds cool to you, it's very nerdy. That kind of thought sounds cool to you, then I do think that architecture is a good career in 2026. Now, just a word of advice. You should take some time, right? If you're thinking of quitting the career, or if you're thinking of joining the career, if you're somewhere in the middle and you're like, what do I do? Do I quit? You do have to jump ship before this thing goes down. I think you should sit down, and for a moment start to contemplate how architecture will evolve in the next few years and what that means for you. Are you ready to deal with that kind of evolution? Are you going to try to protect yourself from that evolution, or are you going to get negatively impacted by it? I mean, one way to think about it is, if you look at like the 80s, the 90s, when computer drafting started to get real popular, people were doing things on blueprints, right? And so there was a wave of architects that got left behind because they weren't able to adapt to the new technology. And the same thing is kind of happening now, where you have AutoCAD. You have like a pool of old school architects who are still using AutoCAD, and you have like this new pool of architects that are doing Revit and just BIM in general, and they're doing like some really cool stuff with Dynamo and just parametric architecture and stuff. And so like little by little, the landscape continues to evolve, and like pockets of architects start to get left behind. And so, do you want that to happen to you? And if not, how do you protect yourself? Well, me personally, one of the things that I think about is like the programs themselves. I think that programs will continue to adapt and they will continue to evolve. And so, you have to make the decision: do I want to stick with one program for the rest of my life, or am I willing to learn new programs as they come out and stay on the cutting edge of that? That is one kind of specialization. Going back to that, is, do you want to be the type of architect that's like knows the latest technologies that's out there and is able to apply it? Because I feel like that's a strong position to be in. I think most architects might be in the realm of, well, this is my program, this is the best program, everything else sucks, and I'm going to make this work. And those are the highest risk architects, because they eventually get phased out by programs that are just much more efficient, right? If you look at like the whole conversation between AutoCAD and Revit, there's always architects that do not want to leave AutoCAD. They want to stay on Revit because AutoCAD gives them more control over the layers and their drawings look cleaner and they read better. Sure, I probably might agree with that, although I think that if you spend a little bit of time on Revit, you can really make some amazing drawings on it if you know what you're doing. But the biggest problem with AutoCAD is how slow it is. And I've proven this to myself and to other colleagues that Revit is just much more efficient, especially when changes are happening. And so when you have a developer who's nickel and diming projects, and you are here being slow or taking longer to adjust to changes because the program that you're using is just inefficient, that is what I mean by you being at risk. And so if you decide that you want to be from the pool of architects that wants to stick to one medium, one program, whether you're sketching or AutoCAD or Revit or whatever it is, and you do not want to adapt to the technological side of it, that's okay. But then you're going to have to specialize in a way that allows you to do that by either creating a company where your focus is just assemblies, detailing, for example, and everybody you hire focuses on being at the cutting edge of where technology is at. You could certainly be that person. But the point is, what I'm trying to say here, guys, is that architecture is a career that is not safe. To be honest with you, I don't know a career that is safe, right? I haven't thought too much about that front. But architecture on its own, I would not say it's a safe career if you are not willing to be on your toes. So if in 2026 you want to stick with architecture, I think it's a hell of a career. I love it. I don't regret my decision in choosing this career, and I've never regretted it for one day in my life, no matter how hard it ever got, because my vision slowly over time became about making buildings better and just building really cool stuff. And so I tend to not focus on the negative side of it. I tend to focus on, well, if something comes and I'm at risk of losing my job over it, how can I protect myself? How can I work with it? Or how can I adapt to um, continue in this career, and not be at this fear of losing my job? So it all comes down to, in my opinion, specialization, right? Getting really good at one thing, like being a nerd over like one section of architecture, and by doing that, I think that architecture is a great career to be in. So it's been a while since I made a YouTube video. I kind of made little videos here and there, little shorts, but it's been a little while since I sit down and kind of talk about it. But it's been, this has been a lot on my mind recently, just thinking about where architecture is going, how I experience it on a day-to-day basis, and I don't fear it. I don't fear all these changes that are happening. My worry is always related to like economics, and if people are not building, then we in this industry are not moving, right? And so that's my worry. But really, technology getting better doesn't really concern me. Maybe I'm just ignorant to certain parts, but this is what I think about. So my camera just fell because of the wind. So yeah, I'll just end it here. That's nature telling me to shut up. So peace out, everybody.